Can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm so excited to have this man on the Turning Points podcast. One of the two reasons is one, first off, I am very happy to know that the Cleveland Browns are in the playoffs. One of the things, though, that has been happening here, and it's a big problem right now, is, of course, the Cleveland Browns are without a few coaches, without a few players because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has actually, unfortunately, hurt them. But this guy is at the Blue Wire Hustle Podcast Network, also USA Today, Browns Wire, and All Eyez on Cleveland podcast. So I couldn't think of anybody better than Brad Ward, who is joining us here live on the line. And Brad, thank you so much for joining us here. Right away, what does the absence of Kevin Stefanski do for the team on Sunday?
Jake, thanks for having me on, man. I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to be here. So I appreciate that. And, yeah, it's a lot. First of all, a lot of excitement, to be in the playoffs and everything, but really kind of frustrating at this point in time, especially the lack of practice time that they're getting. They haven't practiced at all this week yet. Virtual walkthroughs only. So that's frustrating. Stefanski's loss is absolutely brutal. I mean, this is a guy who has been able to dial up everything at the right time. He's had a feel for every game they've been in. He's turned around their culture in one season. And to take him from the sidelines in their most important game of the year when they finally get in the playoffs is brutal. I do think, though, his preparation and the way that he prepares contingency plan for his contingency plan, as he would say, what has them in a position to still compete on Sunday night, but it's a brutal loss. I mean, now you're going to rely on Alex Van Pelt to call plays and things like that. Really, though, the team has taken on the persona of Stefanski, and that's the main thing. So really, it'll be a test of how good of a coach he really is when you pull him away from the sidelines, if they can carry on his mantra without him, right?
What experience does Alex Van Pelt have calling plays for Cleveland?
So Van Pelt called plays in 2009, I believe, for the Buffalo Bills, offensive coordinator there. Obviously, he was a backup in the league for 11 years, star quarterback at Pitt. So, I mean, he has a lot of experience being around the play calling process. And as Stefanski talked about this week, he's been involved all year in the play calling process. The actual plan at the beginning of the year was to have him be the play caller, but because of the lack of practice time they had, they were still installing their offense like going into week one. So because of all that, Stefanski said, let's just eliminate one other issue and I'm going to call the plays. And that just kind of stuck throughout the year because he's really good at it. He has a great feel for the game. He has a great feel for setting up stuff for later in the game. He had the opportunity to be the play caller, but no preseason, no audition. They never really got into that thing. So he could have been there. I think that's what Stefanski wanted to do. It's not the case now. 2009 was kind of a long time ago since he called plays. But I do think he has a real good feel for the offense. As he said, quote unquote, today in his press availability, I'm going to try to call the game through the eyes of Stefanski or as an extension of Kevin Stefanski. So hopefully you don't see a whole lot of change, ideally, for the Browns.
He's Brad Ward, writer for the Browns Wire for USA Today and host of the All Eyez on Cleveland podcast. Joining us here on the Turning Points podcast, I'm Jakerongholt. And he's actually going to be soon one of my coworkers because I will be joining the Blue Wire Hustle Podcast Network soon as well. All right, let's get into this here. So Mike Priefer, he has an excellent resume. Before he came to the Browns, he was a special teams coach for the Minnesota Vikings. Why did they decide to make him the acting head coach for Sunday?
Well, Stefanski said basically he becomes the ideal guy to do this because he knows both sides of the ball, right? So as a special teams coach, you have the offense and you have some of the defense. You have some of both players in your actual room all the time. So he has relationships on both sides of the ball, and he has knowledge of both sides the ball. I think he's a knowledgeable guy with the game. He's been around it for so long. He actually did this before. So he was head coach for a game for the Vikings in 2000. Make sure I have this right. 2016, I want to say. Mike Zimmer had emergency eye procedure, so they called on him to step in as the head coach. He did it then. The Viking beat reporters said he looked the part and he handled the end of game situational, decision making very well. So they lost the game by 2, whatever that means. I mean, not much, but they said that he definitely, he made a challenge to play. He got it right. I mean, how do you evaluate a guy a couple years ago as a head coach? It's tough to do, right? So, but these are the things we look at, is how he handled the decision making in situational football, and it appeared that he did okay in that circumstance. I have confidence in him. I mean, he's the only guy that withstood the regime change here, obviously because of the relationship with Stefanski and his history with the Vikings. But he seemed to be a very knowledgeable guy and a guy that has the respect of the entire team, which makes sense come Sunday.
Let's go back to the beginning of the season. Andrew Berry is made GM, 32 years young. They hire Kevin Stefanski. What did Stefanski bring to this team that made him better than what they were with Freddie Kitchens?
Well, I think, first of all, he's the proverbial adult in the room that was much needed. Kevin, nothing against Freddie Kitchens. I liked Freddie a lot. Great personality. Just wasn't ready for the job, right? Before that, we dealt with Hugh Jackson, who I kind of found to be immature as well at times. Very much in it for himself, in my opinion. And not so much the team. What Stefanski has brought to the table is just an even-keeled approach, all about his work. You can't tell if they won or lost in his press conference. He doesn't give anything away in the press conferences, what you want from a head coach, where you got Hugh Jackson up there, talking about everything that they're doing all the time. It's crazy, right? Like, what are you doing? You're the head coach of a football team. Sit down and be quiet. So Stefanski has been that ideal figure. And he really, it's kind of remarkable. I point to this one issue, right? So as far as like buy-in, you try to measure a team by like how much buy-in they have into their coach, how much the culture is changing. And the culture has been very poor in Cleveland for a long time. But I feel like he's changed the culture in 1 year. And you see it evident in things like Hollywood Higgins, right? Wide receiver. Last year, huge problem with Freddie Kitchens, where they're going back and forth in the media because of playing time. And then this year, he doesn't dress for the first few games. Odell gets hurt. He comes in, plays well. And in the press conference, the first thing he does is applaud the coaching staff for having faith in him and patience in him and all that. That's immediately I point to that and say, that's the exact opposite of what happened last year in the same situation. That's buy-in. That's culture change, right? And I think that is a good example of what he brings to the table. He's very relatable. He's very, concise, clear about his what he wants from them. And like I said, that even-keeled attitude. And more than anything, I think that he's got Baker now. You notice it with Baker's talking like him. His phrasing is the same. The buy-ins there, they're seeing the game the same way. And he's really been an offensive genius this year. He really has put together game plans and wrinkles off of that stuff. It's really been an impressive display of play calling and offensive game planning that I really didn't expect from him. I didn't know what to expect, but he's been excellent. No question.
I didn't know what to expect.
My vote for coach of the year.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, yeah, definitely. I would definitely look at Kevin Stefanski as a coach of the year candidate. Let's talk about Baker Mayfield for a minute. We know what he did with Kirk Cousins back in Minnesota. What was the main focus of getting to that mature level for Baker Mayfield?
I think that Baker came to that conclusion a little bit himself at the end of last year. There's a lot of, uh, chicanery nonsense at the end of last season. You know, there's the game where he shaved 3 times in one game, right? Like before, after the game, and like just a bunch of nonsense. And it was rubbing people the wrong way. And he gets in the altercation with Tony Grossi, beat writer, towards the end of the season. And he kind of, in a conversation with some people as he's exiting the season, the 2019 season, he kind of owns it all and he goes away. And we didn't hear from him all summer, really, right? So, and that was kind of refreshing, like, okay, maybe he's getting it. He comes to camp in shape, looking fit, and doing things the right way. Then the relationship with Stefanski kind of brings him along even further. I really do think that when Odell Beckham Jr., this is going to sound crazy, got hurt, it was probably one of the better things that could happen for his season, as he then felt he becomes the quarterback that he always has been, the point guard. He can spread it around. He doesn't have to worry about feeding Odell, and that burden on his back is released, and the numbers bear it out. Since week 7, he's been top 5 quarterback in the NFL. So it's been a process, and you're right, it's been a maturity thing big time, but I think a lot of that came from within.
Mayfield, 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, only threw 1 interception in his last 6 games. So you can definitely see that he is becoming mature. Let's talk about losses here. Joel Bitonio or Olivier Vernon, who's the bigger loss going into this game?
I would say probably, I would immediately say Bitonio. I mean, that's tough, man. They're both brutal. I would say Bitonio. The only thing with Bitonio is that he has historically played poorly against the Steelers, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with Cam Hayward, right? So Bitonio is a huge loss because they really don't have. They had a swing tackle, Chris Hubbard, who did a nice job replacing some guys earlier in the year. He's out. Nick Harris, he's out. Their rookie who filled in for Teller when he was out. They're both on the IR. So they're very thin at the offensive line. You're either going to ask Kendall Lamb, a tackle, to move over to guard. He's the only guy with playing experience that's there. The other guy that you can ask to fill in is a guy named Michael Dunn. He's played 1 snap in the NFL in a heavy package inside the 10-yard lines around the goal line. And they have a guy off the Jets practice squad. They've added a few other guys. Nobody with any experience, I don't think, playing guard in the NFL. So you're walking a guy out there in a wild card weekend playoff game under the lights against the Steelers, Cam Hayward, Stephen Tuitt, who hasn't played it down yet. I mean, that's just absolutely brutal, right? But so how do you scheme that up to protect your quarterback? How do you remain multiple in your run game, which is something the Browns have been really good at? With the, it started out as the zone read, but then they've, added the pulling guards. They're very good at that stuff, adjusting the run game on the fly. Putting a guard in there that hasn't done it all year becomes detrimental to what you can do and really limits what you can do in the run game. So I think that's the more influential one. I will say, though, that in the time that he spent here, on the defensive side of the ball, as far as defensive end goes, the loss to him is incredible. I mean, he's going to miss an entire year of football probably with the ruptured Achilles in a contract season, and that he was playing his best football that we've seen him play in Cleveland the entire time in the last probably 6, 7, 8 games, 9 sacks this year. So absolutely brutal on both sides of the ball.
Who's going to step up for Vernon?
So Vernon will have you'll have Adrian Claiborne and step in and probably play the majority of that. He's a veteran. He's good. He gets around the quarterback and still disrupts. He's limited in the amount of snaps that he can really take in a game if you want to keep him fresh. That's why he was kind of in the ideal role where they had him, So that's kind of tough there. But you'll also see with Claiborne a guy named Porter Gustin step in. He's a bigger defensive end, more of a power guy. But I'm sure that those two combined will fill in for Vernon.
He's Brad Ward, host of the All Eyez on Cleveland podcast, joining us here on the Turning Points podcast. We tell both sides of the story. You can catch his podcast on the Blue Wire Hustle Network. Speaking about hustling, the running game. The running game was inconsistent last year with Kitchens. What was the main difference to fixing up this running game with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt?
Just the scheme. I really think it's the scheme and the commitment to actually running. Like, so Kitchens, once again, we go to maturity as a head coach, would bail on the run game quick and often. And they were playing, to his defense, they were playing behind a lot, right? So from behind a lot. This offense is at its best when they are even or in front, because everything then looks the same defensively, because you can go play action off it or you can run it and everything looks the same. When you have to go straight drop back out of this offense is when you run into some problems. So if they're ahead or even in the game, the run game is very effective. Like I said, they started off with the zone run game is perfect for Nick Chubb. His vision is excellent. He's always finding that cutback lane to break open big runs. He's got the power and the breakaway speed. He's an absolute stud. Kareem Hunt brings more of the hammer to it. He's just so powerful. And they use him in the second half more. They kind of mix him in the second half more. As teams are getting tired, you keep Chubb fresh and you keep hammering them with Hunt. And Hunt is terrific in the pass game. I mean, he's an outstanding receiver, and he's shown that all year. So they are very, very talented two backs, and Stefanski has just used them beautifully. The only criticism I would have is I think that, and I've heard other people say this, and it made me think about it, so I don't want to take credit for the thought, but they need to use – I think they should use the screen game more. And I wish they would do it on Sunday night. Because Stefanski, if you go back and look at some of the stuff that he did with the Vikings, their screen game with Dalvin Cook was absolutely critical and killed teams when they wanted to put pressure on Cousins. I haven't seen them use it as much in Cleveland, so maybe on Sunday night they can break that open a little bit, I hope. But yeah, using the screen game with Chubb and Hunt would be critical, I think, to this matchup and kind of trying to neutralize that pass rush that's going to be so terrifying from Pittsburgh.
How will this Browns offense attack this Pittsburgh front seven?
Yeah, I think they absolutely got to run right at the guys that you're worried about pass rushing you, right? You got to go right at Watt. You got to go right at Hayward. That's old school football thinking, but the guys that are fast side to side, the guys that cause problems running down plays, it's much harder for them to make plays when you run directly at them. And you take away their ability to really tee off on the key on or tee off on the pass game and on the pass rush when you go to that play action. We were talking about this last night on the show. A lot of what the Browns do passing wise is in the boot game. So you'll see run right, maybe twice in a row. And then oddly, Stefanski is one of the few offensive coordinators in the league that boots his quarterback out to the left as a right-handed quarterback. It's a testament to Mayfield's arm talent because he can do it very successfully, but he boots him out to the left all the time. Now, against the Steelers, you have a hard time doing that because they have that odd front. They keep their linebackers really wide, almost even wider than a wide nine look, and that causes issues when you run that boot game. So they kind of eliminate that from what the Browns want to do, and it causes problems. I do think that the Browns present a matchup issue if they keep the game close for the Steelers because of that run game. I think you can run against the Steelers. We've seen teams do it. We saw Washington do it. We saw some other, whoever that was for Washington that night. We saw Giovanni Bernard have a career night against the Steelers on Monday Night Football out of nowhere, right?
Starters,
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's all about the run game and then what they can do off of it. I certainly think that you're going to have to depend on Mayfield, but the one thing you can say about the Browns going into this game, Jake, is that the pressure is shifted. Week 17, the pressure was all on the Browns. You're playing their B team, right? And your pressure to get in. You haven't been in the playoffs in 20 years. They're resting starters, right? It's a ton of pressure to get in the playoffs and win that game. They barely get over the hump with the 2-point win. They kind of let them get back in it with a couple jump balls late. They were up 24-9 at the start of the fourth quarter, but, they let them get back in it. It's scary. Time stood still on the onside kick where the ball sits between the tight end's legs. It was scary down the stretch. But they hold on and win, get in the playoffs, right? But now so you're over that burden. You're over that hump that you've been trying to get over for like 20 years. Now you're going into Pittsburgh with your team depleted. Their starters are coming back. Your head coach is out. You almost got to go out with your hair on fire, nothing to lose. A team with nothing to lose and they can play free and easy is a scary football team in the playoffs.
Let's stick with scary for a moment because I don't think anybody is more scary on that Pittsburgh front seven than TJ Watt. Which offensive tackle has a better opportunity, though, to be able to defend against him? Jedrick Willis Jr. or Jack Conklin?
Well, Conklin will do a better job in the run game, and I honestly think Wills would do a better job in the pass game. Conklin's a very good tackle, so I trust him more against him. But really, Watt has had his way against Conklin at times in that matchup. Wills is very, very good in pass protection. But if you look at his PFF grades, they're like sky high in pass protection and really low in the run game. He still does okay in the run game. He's just developing, figuring it out a little bit. He still kind of finds a way to get his big body in the right spot and get in the way of somebody sometimes. And that's all you really need when you have like Wyatt Teller swinging around and you've got Bitonio and stuff. Now you don't have Bitonio. I would feel better if Watt was on the right side, more so because he'll have the help of Teller and Conklin over there, where instead of going up against maybe a guy that's never taken snaps and a rookie and Wills on the left side, I think the left side is clearly the weaker side in this game.
He's Brad Ward, a writer for USA Today's The Browns Wire and host of the All Eyez on Cleveland podcast on Blue Wire Hustle Podcast Network, joining us here on the Turning Points podcast, where we tell both sides of the story. Now, outside of Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins, give me one pass catcher that we should be watching out for.
Yeah, well, the tight end room, right? So
okay.
We'll see if they get Harrison Bryant back. You'll have Njoku and you have Hooper, right? Mm-hmm. They love to use their tight ends in this offense. They'll even go three wide on the right side, all tight ends at times, to try to create matchup problems. But as far as a wide receiver goes, after, so DPJ, hopefully Donovan Peoples-Jones, who is their third wide receiver and has had a really good rookie year and really looks comfortable out there in concussion protocol. Kaderil Hodge on the COVID-19 list. So there's your guys that normally would play your third wide receiver position. So now you're looking at a guy that you brought in from the Detroit Lions. Some people may know of him, Marvin Hall. He's on the practice squad. He could be in there. He's a little guy, fast little guy. He played in the week that they lost their entire receiver room against the Jets. He played. And another guy, Jamarcus Bradley, who's on the practice squad, hasn't played much at all in the NFL, but came in that game when the entire receiver room was out and actually played pretty well. I think he had like 5 or 6 catches for 70 some odd yards with Mayfield. They probably don't have a ton of chemistry or whatever, but he looked good in that Jets game, as good as you could have looked, as they didn't look good at all in that game. But, obviously they lost to the Jets, but they had no wide receivers. Not to make excuses, you should still win that game. And Mayfield fumbled, as you recall, may recall, on the final drive where they were looking to tie the game up. They're limited, I hope that Donovan Peoples-Jones, the word was yesterday that he was proceeding nicely through the protocol. So maybe he gets out of the concussion protocol before Sunday night. Really, playing the Sunday night, the last game of the weekend, is the only advantage the Browns have gotten in this COVID breakout situation. I got to tell you, Jake, I'm a little upset at this point.
Go ahead.
Because, you heard at the beginning of the week, Tom Pelissero saying, okay, the NFL and Dr. Sills are saying that last week the breakout was probably from, they deemed it from the community because they can actually trace the strains of COVID, right? Mm-hmm. So there was 3 different strains of COVID that had infected the players. So they say they're not giving it to each other. It's coming in from the community. Sorry, can't do anything about it, right? Now this week, though, today, Pelissero comes out and says that Sills says there probably is some player-to-player passing through the locker room, which is what you had with the Ravens when they suspended the game and what you had in other situations this year when they bought time for teams by moving the games. That's kind of what you need to see for the league to do that. Now, can they do that in the playoffs? I don't think they're gonna. Too much TV money on the line. You can't reschedule the whole weekend. I just don't see it happening. But it's really unfortunate because how fair is it that, not to their own fault at all, that they will not have practiced at all this week? I mean, I don't know if they're going to get a practice in. I mean, and that's with a bunch of guys being pulled out of your lineup. They lost safety Ronnie Harrison, one of the biggest key pieces on the defense. Tonight, he goes on the COVID list. I mean, it's brutal at this point. They are very, very thin everywhere. And without your coach, their offensive line coach, veteran Bill Callahan, who's been great all year, he's still on the list. I mean, it's brutal right now. They really, really are in a tough spot.
Who wins Sunday?
I think that everybody's going to say the Steelers. I will tell you this: I'm not huge on predictions, right? But I'll say this: I'll say that I do think that the Browns can stay competitive if they stay disciplined to the run game and try to play ball control. Here's the thing: Steelers look like crap for the last 4 weeks and a half until they played, the second half of the Colts game. Their offense was almost unwatchable against Washington and losing to Cincinnati. So Mason Rudolph, surprisingly out of nowhere, played a terrific game last week, but, and surprisingly played very well, I thought. I don't know if Roethlisberger at this point can play much better than he did. We'll see what happens. I'm sure they're going to go back to the ball control, short pass game, which is what is so hard to watch, but it's their bread and butter. They don't have a run game. They have a bunch of talented wide receivers, and they're going to run a bunch of rubs and crosses and stops and slants within 5 to 7 yards of the line of scrimmage, and you're going to have to tackle them, because they're talented big wide receivers, and that's just what you got to do to stop them. It's a ball control underneath, depending on quickness and talent of those wide receiver pass game, and it lets Ben be accurate which is what he can do. And then they'll take their shots down the field when they feel necessary. But I don't even think they're going to – I would be surprised if they don't try to stick to the run game hardly at all. They'll bail on that quick and early because it just doesn't exist this year. So do I think the Browns have a chance? I absolutely do. Do I think their backs are up against the wall? 100%. But like I said, I think there's something scary about that when you can go out there and play free and easy. A lot of inexperience on the Brown side, a lot of experience on the Steelers side. That'll be a big factor too. I'm sure if I was a betting man, let's say this, if I was a betting man, I would probably put my money on the Steelers. But I have some hope for the Browns. I'm going one day at a time, man. Let's try to get on the practice field tomorrow. Like, that would be huge. Just get one practice in before the weekend, you know? I mean, that would be gigantic.
All right, let's play a devil's advocate for a minute here. Win or lose, what does the future hold for the Cleveland Browns in the highly competitive AFC North?
Hey, man, I think the arrow's pointed up for sure. So you had GM Barry, AB, Andrew Barry, and youngest GM in the NFL. 1 year on the offensive side of the ball, and you got to give some credit to Dorsey. He brought some of the talent in here, but 1 year that he spent most of the draft on the offensive side of the ball, and with Stefanski, and they did this right, 11-win season and get in the playoffs. And very, right there with your rivals, like the second game against the Ravens, they took them to the edge, right? It took a last second 50-yarder from Tucker to beat them, right? Versus where week one, they got beat off the bus in the parking lot by like 40, right? So they are moving in the right direction. And I love what Stefanski and Barry are doing for this organization. They finally have the right people in place. I think that Baker has proved a lot this year. I'm sure they'll pick up his fifth-year option and see what he does, early next year, and maybe then you can start talking extension. We'll see what he does as far. I don't think they'll go that far this offseason, but I do think they'll give him the guaranteed fifth year this offseason. Same with Denzel Ward. You've got some guys to pay that you want to keep around now, but this draft I would think would be dedicated mostly to the defensive side of the ball and what you can do with that defense if you keep that front somewhat intact. Garrett, Sheldon Richardson, those guys, Elliott is a rookie who's played pretty well up there. They get Brandon Billings back off an opt-out this year. I expect, you keep Ward on the outside. The cornerstones of that defense are Garrett and Denzel Ward. And if you keep them intact, you get Grant Delpit back, who you took in the draft and lost in training camp. And then you add to that safety. Yeah. So if you add some talent on the defense side of the ball through the draft, maybe a little bit through free agency, some depth, and improve that defense, I just think that it only gets better from here. Really, I do. I think the arrow's pointed up big time. Now, I may be somewhat of a homer, but I do think Stefanski has it going in the right way.
You're coming to a close point where I was just about to ask that question. So the Browns have not been in the playoffs since 2002. They're one of the most cursed franchises. This is what you hear outside the city of Cleveland. What did it mean for the Browns to get into the playoffs this year?
I mean, this is a Browns town, man. It is through and through. I mean, it is the only time. I mean, it's a sad story, man. Over the years, you had the '80s. I'm an '80s baby, so I vaguely remember Bernie Kosar. In those detrimental, the fumble and in the drive against the Broncos in the AFC Championship game. But then, you get into the 90s, Belichick starts to turn around the franchise, and then and who knows what would have happened there, right? Look at Bill Belichick now. And Nick Saban was on that coaching staff. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Yeah. Have you seen Cleveland 95, that NFL Network special?
I haven't seen it yet. I'll check it out though.
Yeah, check it out sometime because
sure.
They actually do talk about Belichick, and they talk about Scott Pioli in there, Nick Saban in there. It's a really good special. But yeah, every time I watch that, just it kind of just breaks my heart. I'm not even a fan of the Browns, but I just want this team to just do something, just show something here. And speaking about showing something, Brad Ward, Browns Wire of USA Today and host of All Eyez on Cleveland podcast. You were fantastic, my man. Thank you so much for coming on here, telling us both sides of the story, and let's see what the Browns can do on Sunday. Thank you so much.
Try to tell you both sides. It's hard, you know. Your heart's telling you one thing, but you know, try to get both sides. Thank you, Jake, man. I had an absolute blast. You're the best, man. And anytime you need me, I'm here.
Absolutely. Well, hey, if the Browns win, you never know. I might give you a phone call here, but it should be a good one here. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
All right. That was Brad Ward. Man alive. I tell you one thing. I'm really excited to be part of this Blue Wire Hustle podcast network coming up in the future. You got guys like Brad Ward.
Oh.
You got to be excited for this. All right, we're going to take time out here. And when we come back, we're going to jump into the hardwood floors of the National Basketball Association. My guy from 538.com, Chris Krause, will be joining us next right here on the Turning Points podcast, where we tell both sides of the story. I'm Jake Rongholt. Hey, we're just warming up here, and you're listening to it right here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor.